okay. So, Eamonn McCann is a long-term activist for social rights and justice, not just in Derry, but further afield. He's also an author and a journalist, and I am delighted to have this conversation with you, Eamonn, today.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you. Now, as you are aware, the Five for Palestine campaign will be assembling at Magilligan Beach, Magilligan Strand, on Saturday the 24th of January. That's this Saturday. And we wish to highlight the plight of Palestinian prisoners held hostage in Israeli dungeons. So we're also going to mark the 54th anniversary of the anti-internment march attacked by British armed forces in 1972, 1 week before Bloody Sunday. Now, you were very prominent in the civil rights movement at that time, and you were there that day, Eamonn. Could you explain to our listeners, many of whom will have no living memory of that time, could you explain what happened that day and why you were there?
Yeah, well, this was part of the civil rights movement, which had begun, of course, in the autumn of 1968. And the civil rights movement was a movement with very moderate demands. And you'd be reminded of James Connolly's statement that our demands most modest are, we only want the earth.
Yeah.
Now, and that sort of contradictory or seemingly contradictory statement really just meant that sort of we want freedom for ourselves, we want civil rights for ourselves, but we can see that looking around the world that it's not just for ourselves, that there's an international, like, global movement underway, which was expressed, of course, in the civil rights movement in the United States and the student riots and demands in Germany and France and in Australia, where there was quite a big movement. There was a global movement underway, and of course the Prague Spring kind of in Czechoslovakia, as it then was. So there's all these things happening more or less simultaneously. So what we were saying sort of with that sort of slogan and that approach was that we saw the struggle for civil rights in the North as part of the same thing as struggles going on elsewhere. We weren't unique. We were part of the same suffering multitudes sort of around the world, and that gave us a certain resonance. You know that if you're running down Rossville Street towards the RUC or the British Army and chanting 2648, organise and smash the state, in the knowledge and conscious of the fact that exactly the same slogan was being chanted on the streets of Portland in Oregon, sort of in New York, and indeed sort of across Europe. Now, there's something really liberating about that, to feel that connection, not just to do it intellectually, but to feel that connection with people fighting elsewhere. And so I think that what happened at Magilligan and what was to happen a week later in Bloody Sunday was not just an Irish phenomenon, but it was Ireland being part of a phenomenon in which plain people around the world can look back at and take pride in.
Absolutely, Eamonn. Indeed, there was a lot going on then, just like today. But now the paratroopers who attacked the marchers that day, Eamonn, and they were marching because they were marching at Magilligan Strand because there was, I think, up to 50 young men interned without trial, without process, and the people in Derry assembled on that beach, marched onto that beach to oppose internment that day.
Yeah. Yes, indeed, it was. Internment was a big issue, and understandably so. And here we had a situation where a country, England or Britain, sort of prides itself on believing in the rule being a civilized country and so forth, here it had been sort of just rampaging around areas like the Bogside and the Falls and Belfast and other nationalist working class areas, with no concern about the law at all, just snatching people from their homes, carrying them off in the middle of the night, battering them if they dared to resist, and throwing them in prison without any charge being brought against them, without any trial. Now, that ran counter to everything that it was the British ruling class claimed to believe in. So it's, and that gave rise to, there was all sorts of reactions to it. There were some people, very moderate people, sort of in the north, who were saying that what we want is British rights for British citizens, which was putting it very mildly indeed. But when that wasn't conceded, a very basic demand, sort of, that ordinary people can't retreat from, the right to a fair trial, sort of the right to be treated equally in your own society in relation to jobs and housing and the rest of it. I mean, it was the crushing of a movement which very moderate demands like that, that's what enraged people more than anything else. Had there been some sort of mass uprising in the north, then you might have understood. You wouldn't have supported, but you might have understood why there was a vigorous reaction from the British security forces. But this was a moderate movement. It was not an armed movement. Its demands, as you say, were an end to internment, which is why there was the march on Magilligan Strand, right adjacent to Magilligan Prison, where there were so many people were being held without trial. It was the fact that that was repressed, which made people turn, to other methods. And, when people look back on it now, and when conventional historians look back and say, well, there were these armed extremists in the north, and the British Army had to move in to preserve and protect, democratic norms, that's absolutely untrue. It's a straightforward lie. When journalists and historians should not be trotting like that. The movement started as a peaceful movement dedicated to peace, and for what, when we look back on it, were really minor changes. They were not sort of huge, things that were demanding the removal of the British forces from the north. Many people might have believed that and been sort of dedicated to that, but they joined in a movement in order to make it broad, which was dedicated to peaceful means to achieve moderate advances. That's what was happening. I mean, a movement like that is shot off the streets. And how do you expect people to react? It was a very normal reaction, a simple, instinctive reaction, say, okay, if that's the way you want it, we're going to fight back in the same way as you are attacking us. That's where the Northern Ireland troubles came from. It wasn't from, Republicans or mad left-wingers or crazy extremists of any kind. I mean, trying to take over the north or trying to take over particular areas. What sparked the armed struggles and extremism, as they call it, what sparked that was the behaviour of the British security forces. And that should never be forgotten, particularly when people now, and journalists and other political commentators, look back on that period and try to pretend and to lie that this all arose because of extremism, and that the British Army came into our areas, to stop two warring tribes destroying one another, to stand in the middle. That's not what happened. That's not what happened. The British brought this upon themselves and upon the people of the north. That's what happened.
Well, certainly, Eamonn, certainly the black and white footage of that particular day, it really shows unarmed people, just ordinary people, standing on the beach, batons, rubber bullets, CS gas. I mean, the images speak for themselves on that day. But when I spoke to you earlier, you made the point that the people on that beach knew the people who were being in turn detained without charge, without process.
Yes, I mean, the people who were interned and who had been scooped up sort of on the previous 9th of August and imprisoned without trial. I mean, they came from areas, where there were lots of young people, there were lots of young Catholic working class people. They already had a feeling, and a proper feeling, that they were being discriminated against, and that's why they formed a movement in opposition to the British rulers here. So it's looking back on it and compared to what's happening today, both in the north and around the world, boy, was it a peaceful movement. It's almost embarrassing to look back on it now and see how limited the demands were and how peaceful the methods were when we look back on it. So there's no question but that the troubles which erupted were detonated, not by anybody in the north, loyalist or nationalists. It wasn't the detonation of the troubles came not from within, but from without, from the British forces and the lies of the British political establishment as well. That's who's responsible for the troubles. That's who's ultimately responsible for all the deaths which resulted.
Well, nothing really has changed as far as the British establishment is concerned, because they are now criminalising people who are standing up for Palestine. And while you will not be able to attend on Saturday, Eamonn, I know that you will be sending your solidarity. You'll be with us in spirit.
Absolutely.
And you did, when I spoke to you earlier, you said that you had a condition that you weren't able to walk on sand.
No, look, it takes me sort of an effort to walk on a hard pavement because my balance isn't very good at all. Instead of walking on sand, I wouldn't get very far. I'd fall down and I'd have to have people holding me up. So it's not for me anymore, sort of walking on sand, although I will be making my metaphorical footprints on the road to liberation.
Well, there's one thing for sure, Eamonn, that there are some world leaders would be deluded enough to think that they could walk on water, but you can still walk on solid ground, and you will be at the Guildhall Square on Saturday at 3:00. Standing with your fellow civil rights veterans and the wonderful people of Derry who came out in support of Palestine. Every Saturday you hold up your placards, I support Palestine Action, and you stand there every Saturday for the last how many months now? Since it was prescribed. Since it was prescribed. When we return from Magilligan, we will absolutely join you in solidarity. And
I'm looking forward to that. I really am, because if we don't all stand together, we're going to get nowhere. So that's the importance of us all coming together on Saturday afternoons.
Absolutely. And just one other point I wanted to make before we wind up, that Magilligan Strand is an active training firing range for British troops, and we all know that Britain is complicit, not just complicit, but participants in this genocide. Indeed, I mentioned to you yesterday that our neighbours in Donegal, at the other side of Lochfoyle, can hear them training, can hear gunfire in an outstanding area of beauty, just where Lochfoyle meets the North Atlantic. I think it's important that we make that point as well. We look forward to Saturday and to joining you all at Guildhall Square after that.
And I look forward to seeing all you, like you and the others, from your part of the world, so that all us Derry ones will be waiting to welcome you in Guildhall Square.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Eamonn.
Okay.
Free Palestine. Okay.
Free Palestine. Okay.
All the best. Slán.